I heard my dad say, "She's fine. She just needs to move out." I asked why he was kicking me out. He said it was time. This morning, my grandpa called, "Pack your bags." I'm using a throwaway account because I don't want my friends or family to recognize my main one, as it contains personal information. I'm a 21-year-old woman who lost my mom when I was 14. My dad remarried when I was 17, and my stepmom has a 15-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. Together, she and my dad have a 3-year-old son, and she recently gave birth to a baby girl. I started working at 16 to have my own money for personal expenses. When I turned 18, my dad told me that, as an adult, I needed to start paying rent, $500 a month, which he called a symbolic amount since he would still cover food and essentials. I was upset and argued with him, but ultimately, I accepted it, and that arrangement continued until about 7 months ago. Then, my dad told me I had 2 months to move out because my stepmom was pregnant, and they needed my room for the baby. I found this unreasonable, considering they both have private offices, and my stepmom, who has been a stay-at-home mom since my baby brother was born, doesn't even need one. Despite my frustration, they insisted I leave. Just to clarify, my stepmom and I get along well, we don't argue, and I don't think this was a wicked stepmother situation, though I can't be certain. My stepsister and I are actually quite close. I help her with homework, we talk about personal matters, and I genuinely care for her. Back to the story, I didn't know what to do. I'm going to a college, I want to be a civil engineer, and work part-time. I don't have the means to live by myself. I called my aunt, asking if I could move in with her for the time being, until I figured something out, offered to pay rent and all. She was aghast at what Dad was doing. She said I absolutely could live with her, no rent needed, but also said she was gonna deal with my dad. The next day Grandpa came to our house, and they talked privately. I could hear my dad's angry voice, but couldn't understand anything being said. After a while Grandpa came to my room and said I had 3 choices. The first was continue living with Dad and stepmom like I was doing, nothing would change except without paying rent. The second was moving in with him and Grandma, or my aunt. Third was find a place of my own and he would pay the rent and costs for me. He said I didn't need to choose now, I could keep living with Dad, and if I changed my mind to just tell him. I was actually relieved I could still live with Dad, and that this madness was over. But the following days and weeks, Dad and stepmom were very hostile towards me, and I felt incredibly uncomfortable being in my own home. Even Cassie picked this up and asked me why they were angry at me. So I decided to move out and told Grandpa. He said he would take care of everything. Few weeks later he moved me into one of his rental units. The apartment is lovely. He bought me a fridge, stove, and other essential items. He gave me a check for $15,000 saying this money is to help me start living on my own. And that as long as I am working or studying, I can live there rent-free, for as long as I want. My dad and I have been pretty low contact since I moved out. He never came to visit me, or I visit them. I miss them a lot, especially my stepsister, but am still hurt. 2 weeks ago, my stepmom gave birth, and I visited them in the hospital. It was a bit awkward, but still nice to see them and meet my baby sister. A few days ago, my dad called, saying he missed me, the kids missed me, and that I should move back home. He apologized for making me move out, going on and on about it. I told him I'd think about it. Yesterday, I visited my aunt and mentioned what my dad had said. My cousin chuckled and said, "I'm sure he does." I asked what he meant, and that's when they told me a lot of things I hadn't known until now. Apparently, the house my dad lives in actually belongs to my grandpa, just like my aunt's. Grandpa's whole philosophy has always been that no one in the family should have to worry about basic necessities like housing or food. The arrangement my dad had with me, charging me rent, wasn't just unfair, it went against what Grandpa intended for all his kids and grandkids. When I had called my aunt back then, she had informed Grandpa, and he was furious. Not only for my dad kicking me out but also for making me pay rent in a house that wasn't even his. Grandpa went to my dad's place, chewed him out, and even threatened to have him evicted. Now, here's the petty part. Remember that $15,000 Grandpa gave me? Turns out, that's the exact amount I had paid my dad in rent over the years. Grandpa is now making him pay it all back. On top of that, Grandpa is charging my dad an additional $1,200 for the rental loss on the apartment I'm currently living in. Call me naive, but I never realized my dad didn't actually make that much money. We lived comfortably, always had nice vacations, and never seemed to struggle. Turns out, Grandpa was the one making sure of that behind the scenes. Now, my cousin thinks my dad is struggling financially with 3 kids, a single income, and having to pay Grandpa back. He suspects that my dad wants me to move back home because he assumes Grandpa will ease up on him if I return. Honestly, I don't know what to do. I love living on my own. It's been amazing these past 6 months. but I really miss them. I miss my siblings. I miss the life we had before all of this. Still, I can't ignore the fact that my dad's motives for wanting me back seem to be about money more than anything else. I just needed to vent. Update. I wanted to give you all an update since you've been so kind and supportive. I was overwhelmed by the encouragement I received, thank you 1,000 times over. Before I get into it, I wanted to answer a few questions people had. My aunt and grandpa are from my dad's side of the family. Unfortunately, I don't have much contact with my mom's side. Her parents passed away before she did, and while I do have a few uncles and aunts, I only see them occasionally since they don't live nearby. On my dad's side, I also have 2 uncles I'm close with, but my aunt has always been the closest to me. She was my rock after my mom died, and I see her as a second mother. As for my stepmom, she knew I was paying rent, and it was implied that my stepsister would have to do the same when she turned 18. However, I don't know if she was aware that my dad didn't actually own the house or the full extent of grandpa's financial support. Now for the update. On Monday, the day after my last post, I called my dad and told him I had decided not to move back. I didn't mention anything about what I had learned. I just said that I was settled in my current place and that moving back felt like a step backward. However, I made it clear that I still wanted to stay in touch. I told him they could invite me over for dinner anytime, and I'd love for my stepsister and little brother to be able to spend time with me at my place. He sounded disappointed, but at least there was no anger in his tone. He just said, "We'll see," and left it at that. I won't lie, I felt disappointed, too. Then, on Friday, he called me again and asked if I wanted to have lunch together on Sunday, today. I told him I already had plans with Grandpa and Grandma, so he asked when I'd be free, and we scheduled a dinner for Thursday instead. I haven't mentioned any of this to my stepsister yet, even though we text and talk regularly. She also hasn't heard anyone in the house talking about me. But she did tell me that her grandma, her mom's mom, is staying over to help with the baby and is incredibly annoying. That made me laugh. I really want to invite her for a sleepover at my place, but I don't want to get her hopes up just for my dad to say no. I'll try to bring it up when we talk on Thursday. The big update is I've just came back from visiting Grandpa and Grandma. We spent a lovely day together. But I also said I wanted to know everything that was going on. I wasn't a kid anymore and I felt like living in lies. The most important things were what my cousin and aunt told me last week, but there were a few more details I learned. Grandpa has been covering a lot of our basic needs, things like school, healthcare, and other expenses, because, according to him, Dad doesn't have a single cent saved. He also told me that my college fund was primarily contributed by him and my mom before she passed. Looking back, I guess that makes sense, and I feel a little foolish for not realizing it sooner. On top of that, Grandpa has set up funds for my younger siblings, and even one for my stepsister, because he didn't want her to feel left out or have fewer opportunities than the rest of us. That man is incredible. I love him so much. And yes, I know I'm very lucky. So many people have commented on this, not in a negative way, but with kindness and support. I'm fully aware of how privileged I am to have grandparents and family members who can and want to help me. I can only hope that one day, I'll be able to do the same for others. I also brought up my concerns about my dad's financial situation, and Grandpa reassured me that he's fine, more than fine. He'll just have to cut back on unnecessary spending for a while. But Grandpa made it clear that he would never let any of his kids or grandkids suffer or go without what they need. As many of you pointed out, this is his way of teaching Dad a lesson, one he admits he should have taught him a long time ago. So I'm staying out of it. A lot of people suggested confronting my dad, but I don't think I will. I'd rather let him continue thinking I don't know any of this. Finally, Grandpa and I talked about why my dad kicked me out. He didn't have an answer either, but I could tell that both he and Grandma were deeply hurt by what Dad did. Grandpa said he asked him for an explanation but never got one. For now, I'm just going to focus on maintaining a relationship with my siblings outside of my dad and stepmom. I also want to try scheduling weekly dinners with them. And as for my dad, I know a lot of what people have said about him is true, but I need to at least try to have a relationship with him, not just for him, but for my siblings and for myself. But don't worry, I won't let him hurt me again. Update. There's not much of an update, but a few people messaged me asking how dinner went. So, last Thursday after work, I went over. God, I missed my siblings so much. I spent most of my time with them. My baby brother isn't a baby anymore, he's grown so much. And my baby sister, she's adorable. I swear, I could just eat her up. I never want to be apart from them again, no matter what happens. Cassie, I accidentally mentioned her name in my original post, she's my stepsister, is the only one I've been in regular contact with through calls and texts. She's just an amazing person. She knows I didn't leave on the best terms, but she doesn't know the details or anything about the money. I asked if she wanted to have a sleepover at my place sometime, and she was thrilled. If I hadn't stopped her, she would have started packing right then and there. My stepmom's mom is still there helping with the baby. And guess where she's staying? My old bedroom. They turned it into a guest room. Meanwhile, the baby's room is now my stepmom's old office because, as they put it, it's closer to the master bedroom. Honestly, that stung a little. I haven't met my stepmom's parents many times, but they were always nice to me. This time, though, her mom kept staring at me, like, no matter where I was or where I moved, she was watching me, like she expected me to steal something. And when I was holding the baby, she wouldn't leave my side. Aside from that, the dinner went about as well as you'd expect. A little awkward, but I was really happy to see my siblings and spend a few hours playing with them. Before I left, I brought up Cassie having a sleepover over the weekend. Her grandmother immediately shut it down, saying, absolutely not, but, to my surprise, my stepmom stopped her. She said that if Cassie wanted to go, I could pick her up after her soccer practice on Saturday. And that was pretty much it for the night. But when I was leaving, my stepmom gave me a really tight hug. So many people have said she's just an evil stepmom that I almost started believing it myself. But like I mentioned in my first post, we always had a good relationship. I left feeling really confused and emotional. Saturday afternoon I picked Cassie, we watched Inside Out 2, then we ate shawarma for the first time, which is basically a meat burrito. I don't see the difference. It was so good to spend the day with her. I'm so glad to have her in my life. On Sunday, I dropped Cassie off and went inside to see my other siblings. Dad wasn't home, he was out meeting a work friend. For those who asked, my dad is a lawyer, and my stepmom used to work for an advertising company but is now a stay-at-home mom. We have another dinner planned for Friday. I don't know if I'll ever get a clear answer about why they wanted me to move out or why they charged me rent. Right now, I don't want to bring it up because I don't want to risk my relationship with my siblings. So, I'm not sure if there will be any more updates since things are settling down and life is just moving forward. But if I ever do find out, I'll update you all. You've all been incredible. Thank you so much for the kindness and support you've given me. Talking about this and reading your responses has helped me more than I can say. I also took some of your advice and started therapy. My first session is this Friday. Update. Things have completely blown up, and I honestly don't even know where to begin. I'm still trying to process everything I've been told. Since my last update, things had been fairly normal on my end. I had another dinner with my parents the Friday before last. My stepmom's mom, who I'll call Ebby, short for evil bitch, spoiler alert, was still giving me dirty looks, but I ignored her. I had plans to have dinner with them again last Friday and was also talking to them about taking my little brother to the park on Saturday. But on Wednesday, my dad called me and asked if we could postpone dinner. Instead, he wanted me to come to Grandpa's on Saturday because he needed to talk with the whole family. Meanwhile, Cassie had been keeping me updated, and she told me that stepmom, who I'll call Ste, and Ebby had been fighting a lot. Then, last Sunday, Ste's father, who I'll now refer to as Laby, lying bastard, showed up. A huge argument broke out, and by Monday, both Laby and Ebby had left and gone back home. So, yesterday afternoon, I went to Grandpa's house. My aunt was there, and then my dad and Ste arrived with Cassie. Dad looked embarrassed. He apologized to me and to my grandparents. Ste apologized to me too. Then, my dad finally explained everything, an apology, an explanation, and a reason for everything that's happened over the past few years. Some of it I already knew, but Cassie didn't, and she was there for the whole conversation. I'll try to lay it all out as clearly as possible. Years ago, Grandpa and a friend started a company, and it became very successful. When my dad turned 25, Grandpa sold the company and made a lot of money. As a way to support his kids, he gifted each of them $350,000, with one condition: they had to use it to buy a home or pay off a mortgage. Grandpa had seen too many people lose their homes, and he wanted to make sure that never happened to his kids. But my dad? Instead of buying a home, he moved to New York to start his own law practice and become a big and successful lawyer. As you can probably guess, that didn't work out. A few years later, he had burned through all the money and couldn't even afford rent anymore. So, he reached out to Grandpa for help and moved back home. Grandpa helped him find a job through one of his friends. Eventually, my dad started getting his life back together. He got a place, moved out, met my mom, and they fell in love. After some time, he asked her to marry him. But before they got married, Grandpa stepped in again. He offered to gift them a home. He had already discussed it with his other kids, and they were fine with it. However, because Grandpa didn't fully trust my dad, he put the house in his name, not my dad's. His reasoning? He wanted to make sure that his future grandkids would always have a home, no matter what happened. and in his will, the house would go directly to my dad's kids. So I was actually mistaken before. My uncles and aunt don't live in homes owned by Grandpa, only my dad does. And I think 2 cousins of mine as well. Next thing I was born. Life is good for a while, then Mom passes away. Dad struggles with taking care of me alone. That's when Grandpa starts to help financially. Few more years, Dad meets Ste, but Dad is embarrassed about not owning the house, and that Grandpa is helping him, so he never tells Ste any of this. For her dad was just a moderately successful lawyer. They marry, she becomes pregnant, she asks if she could become a full-time som, and Dad is embarrassed to say no. So he tells her it's fine. In the meanwhile, now with 3 kids, plus a som wife, Dad is struggling even more, Grandpa is helping more, and Dad's savings are being diminished day by day. Dad admitted that he essentially threw Ste under the bus when talking to Grandpa, blaming her for his financial struggles so that Grandpa would continue supporting him, for the sake of the kids. Now, let's backtrack a bit and talk about Labi and Ebby. Just like Ste, they believed my dad was a wealthy and successful lawyer. They started telling him that he was spoiling me, that I would become irresponsible with money, and that I had an easy life. Labi even compared it to his own experience, saying that when he was my age, he had to pay rent to his father, and he made his own son, Ste's brother, do the same. According to him, this made them successful, independent, and never reliant on anyone. The whole bootstrap mentality. And apparently, that really got into my dad's head. He became afraid that I would become financially dependent on him, or, more accurately, Grandpa, instead of building a successful life on my own. Worse, he feared that I would turn out like him, someone still relying on their father for help. So, instead of going to Grandpa for advice, who, by the way, was far more successful and had raised 3 out of 4 successful kids, he started taking parenting advice from his in-laws. When I asked why he didn't just talk to Grandpa, he admitted it was because of embarrassment. And that word kept coming up over and over again, embarrassment. He didn't want Grandpa to think even less of him. And that's how the whole rent idea came up. It was Labi's suggestion. Dad claimed that his original plan was to save the money and give it back to me later. But with a new baby on the way, Ste not working, and his need to appear financially stable in front of his wife and in-laws, saving the money became impossible. Instead, he just kept it. He also lied to me at the time, saying that this was normal, that Grandpa had done the same thing to him and his siblings. I only found out that was a lie 8 months ago, but at the time, it felt like such a minor detail compared to everything else going on. There's also something I hadn't mentioned before because I didn't think it was relevant. But I realize now, it is. I'm part of the LGBTQIA+ community. I don't hide it, though I also don't make a big deal out of it. My mom knew before she passed, and she was supportive. This will be important later. Anyway, back to what happened. At some point, Labi became my dad's confidant. Dad started opening up to him about his financial struggles, and Labi began suggesting that I needed to move out. At first, my dad resisted the idea. But then Ste got pregnant again, and my dad panicked. That's when Labi and Ebby made their move. They offered to help him, not just financially, but also by having Ebby move in after the baby was born to help take care of the kids. Ebby even promised to convince Ste to go back to work, since she'd be there to handle childcare. But there was one condition: I had to move out. Their excuse? The house wasn't big enough to accommodate Ebby, and that it was time for me to leave the nest. And just like that, they convinced my dad that I had to go. Dad never shared any of this with Ste, just told her he believed it was the best decision for me, and that the baby's arrival was a great opportunity. From what I've been told, Ste disagreed, but Dad pulled the "I'm her father, I know best" card, so she went along with it. When they told me I needed to move out, I explained things from my perspective. That same day, Grandpa went to my dad's house, and a huge argument broke out, not just between Grandpa and Dad, but also between Dad and Ste. It was then that Ste discovered Dad didn't actually own the house, had little to no savings, and was financially dependent on Grandpa. On top of that, his arrangement with her parents was still a secret. At that point, I asked Ste why she had been so hostile towards me after that day, why she made me feel so unwelcome that I wanted to leave. She looked completely shocked. She apologized, started crying, and told me she had never been angry at me, only at Dad. She had no idea that her actions had contributed to my decision to move out. I was crying too and assured her it wasn't her fault. And honestly, I know many of you have spoken badly about her, and I get it. But I truly believe her. The look on her face when I said I felt unwelcome, that kind of reaction can't be faked. Now, I'm realizing she was just as much a victim of my dad's actions as I was. All this time, she had only been trying to give me space. Back to what happened next. I moved out, and Grandpa not only cut off Dad financially but also started charging him rent for the house. The only expense he continued covering was Cassie's education. With everything out in the open, Dad and Ste had to cut back. No more fancy dinners, expensive food, or luxuries. They even had to sell her car. Labie and Ebby pitched in some money to help them get by. Ste, meanwhile, was under immense stress, pregnant and dealing with a husband who had lied to her. I actually feel bad for her and everything she went through. I could tell Grandpa did too. I don't think he fully realized how much pressure he was putting on her. As for what he'll do next regarding Dad and the house, I have no idea. Before the baby is born, Ebby moves in with Dad and Ste gives birth, things are normal. But with the new baby, Dad feels even more guilty over what happened, and that when he calls me. Again, this part 1 already told you, jumping to when I went to dinner the first time. Dad and Ste also recognize Ebby acting strange towards me. After I left they talked, nothing came from it. But Ste kept talking to Dad about her mom. And Dad started to tell her his conversations with Ebby and Labie, about money and raising kids, etc. After my second dinner, Ste confronted her mom, and they had a huge fight. And apparently that's when she said something in the lines of, "I can't believe you're letting that slur back into your home after getting rid of her." That was the moment it finally clicked for Dad. He realized just how much of a fool he had been. They kicked Ebby out, and Labie came to pick her up, which led to yet another fight. Despite everything, Dad wanted to pretend like nothing had happened, to carry on as usual, have me visit, and work on rebuilding our relationship. But Ste put her foot down. She told him he needed to come clean, not just to me, but to Cassie and everyone else, no more half-truths or secrets. And that brings us to the present. I was crying, Ste was crying, Cassie was crying, Dad was crying, my aunt was crying, Grandpa was crying. Even Grandma, who hadn't said a single word the entire time, just held me tightly. According to Dad, that's it. No more lies, no more deception. After that, he and Ste left. I ended up staying at Grandpa's house because I was in no state to drive. I came home this morning, took a ridiculously long shower, and cried my eyes out. Now, I'm typing all of this out, hoping it helps me process everything, my thoughts, my emotions, all of it. I guess that's where the story ends. I have no idea what to do next. I feel sad, angry, and sorry for Ste and Cassie. I feel everything and nothing at the same time. I'll be calling my therapist tomorrow to see if I can book more sessions. I usually go every Friday, but I can't wait a whole week for this. On the bright side, whoever had their money on evil step-grandmother won. Relevant comments. Signal_historian_456, family therapy could really help. Take your time, and if, in the end, you still can't trust your dad, that's completely valid, he destroyed everything. I also hope they completely cut ties with her parents and never allow them back into their lives. OOP, the more I think about it, the more I worry about what this means for my dad's marriage to my stepmom. She's been through so much these past few months and has 2 small children to care for. I'll suggest therapy to her as well, both individual and family therapy. I also just realized that she no longer has her mom's help with the baby, which must make things even harder for her. I'll talk to her and offer whatever support I can. Sweet Becky, it's still unclear why Ebby has such an issue with you. Her reaction to the idea of you moving back in seems too extreme to be just about making sure you don't rely on your dad as you get older. Also, your stepmom really needs to stop having more kids, and honestly, your grandpa should keep charging your dad rent until he learns how to manage his finances. Thorn_road, it sounds like Ebby dislikes you because you're part of the LGBT+ community, especially given the slur she used. OOP, that's what my dad and stepmom have said. He told me he realized she was a bigot who was trying to push me away. I never really had much interaction with them. Whenever my parents visited, I usually stayed with my grandparents. So I don't know if that was just the final straw for him or if they had said other things to him in the past. He's never shown any signs of not supporting me, and neither has my stepmom. That's why it never even crossed my mind that this could be the reason.